Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, as I take up more of your questions in another segment of Ask Judy. If you have a question you'd like to ask me, put it in any of the comments, and that's where I pull them from. Since this is Memorial Day, before I start answering questions, I wanted to take a moment to honor and remember all of those whose lives have been lost in service to our country. Thank you so much for your service. This is from Foxfire Pony, who said, as I posted in your previous video, the Walton House appeared in the V series of 1984-85. I scanned through the episodes which are available on Tubi and found the shots. In episode 5, The Sanction at 2317, Mark Singer walks down a dirt path with the Walton House on the left. At 2550, he's sitting on the front porch with his on-screen son when a visitor soldier attacks him. In episode 7, The Overlord, at 3516, Mark Singer is in an action scene at the facade of Ike Godsey's store. Since V used stages 25 and 26 at Warner Brothers, it would make sense that these locations would be utilized by the show, as it didn't have the budget of the two preceding miniseries. That is very cool. Thank you so much for sharing those detailed pieces of information. This is from Michelle Humphrey, who said the Patricia Heaton show, The Middle, used the house facade as the home of the grandfather. I recognized it right away. Thank you for sharing that. This question is from T. Penny, who said another informative podcast. When filming, did the scenes get filmed in sequence or out of sequence? And did the cast have to be on set even though you had no lines? So we shot out of sequence, and that was because we had to deal with the set we were in. So it wouldn't make sense if the first scene of the episode is in the front yard, we would be on the back lot of the studio shooting in the front yard of the house. Then if the second scene, if you saw some of the family go into the house, and the next scene is those family members entering the living room and going on into the kitchen to go have lunch or dinner or something. So if we did it in sequence, it would be, oh, we're outside. Now we got to move all the equipment onto the soundstage and set all the lights, and everybody change their wardrobe and everything and that. And then maybe the next scene is the next morning and it's out in the barn. So then they'd have to move all the equipment back over to the barn. So for the kind of locations that we used, we had to shoot out of sequence. So if we started off in the front yard, then we would shoot everything in that episode that was in the front yard. Now, we might be able to shoot them in sequence within the episode, but sometimes they're different times of day. Sometimes it's one's night, one's day, things like that. And it can also depend on what actors are in the scene. So things will get grouped, like when the children were young and they could only be there until a certain time or a certain number of hours, then maybe they got called in at 9 o'clock. So maybe they wanted to get something done before the children were ready to be used in the scene, hair, makeup, wardrobe, all that. So they might start with another scene. Well, that scene might be just with Grandpa and John in the mill. And so they'd shoot that. That might be later in the episode. And then all of a sudden the children arrive, and now we're going to do something. So they're going to make use of all the children and all the scenes with the children. So things like that. So things get grouped based on the actors as well and who's there and what time. They try not to do things where they bring you in and you're in the first scene and then you sit around all day and you're not in until the last scene of the day. It happens sometimes, but sometimes they're able to group things together and then send somebody home. That isn't their primary objective, because they have to mostly work with what makes the most sense on the shooting schedule. So that's why we don't shoot in sequence. So the actors just have to get used to, where am I in the storyline now? What's happened already? Am I on some sort of an emotional arc that impacts where I am here relative to the scene that's going to happen after, or something that happened before? So a lot for the actors to keep track of. So then, did you have to be on the set even though you had no lines? If you were in a scene, even though you had no lines, then yes, you had to be there. If the camera wasn't on you, then no, you probably didn't need to be there. But you certainly needed to be there. If you weren't working at all that day, then you didn't not need to be there. Not relative to the shooting. They didn't make you come in and sit around all day. If they suddenly had to change something, you might be on call, and you kind of had to be prepared that if you got a phone call, it's like we've had to change something around and now we're going to shoot a scene today that wasn't on the schedule. And so we need you in. So please come in now. So you might have to, okay, go get in the car, drive to the studio because they were adding something or changing something. So that was kind of how that worked. And then you said when Daddy went to see John Boy on campus in the family truck, what was the site where that was filmed? Was an actual college campus. No, Boatwright University was filmed on the Warner Brothers lot on an area of the lot called Midwest Street. And that facade that was used for Boatwright University was also used for other, part of it was used for a courthouse one time. I think part of it was used when Mary Ellen went to nursing school one time. So those sets were used frequently for different sorts of things. When it was Boatwright, they put in sort of these movable kind of pillars or posts that, where there were signs that said Boatwright University. So they sort of set dressed it for Boatwright University. But I know in the first day episode, I believe we sort of saw when John Boy accidentally parked in the wrong place in Professor Goat's parking place. There was a point, I think, when the way the camera was pointing, we also saw, I think, the town square, that gazebo that we saw, other things in the Waltons, and certainly in multiple other film shoots. So that studio lot. This question is from, I'm not sure if it's Anna Chacker or Anna Ichacker. Sorry about that. The house that was next to Godsey's store that Ben and Ike were doing a business endeavor together. How long did that home stay around, and was it used for something else behind the scenes? I think that what was next to Godsey's store was Godsey's hall at mostly. So it might have looked like a house from the outside. I think there was also a point where they brought in some little homes to sort of form a bit of a motor court area. They then moved some little houses that were from the outside. So Godsey Hall was built into one of the seasons. I'm not sure what the first episode was where we saw Godsey Hall or when that property was turned into Godsey's Hall. And then things progressed. At one point, they built the boardwalk that kind of meandered around outside. And then at some point, Jodie Foster and Jim Bob opened a garage across the way. So that little town square area right outside of Godsey's store sort of grew over the years. But mostly it was used as Godsey's Hall, where during the war stuff, they sort of set up a little canteen for the soldiers. There were recitals that were done in there. There were different sorts of town meetings. So it was mostly used for that. And then you wanted to know, in the scenes where it would show any of you walking from the Walton home to Ike and Corbeth's store, how long of a walk was that really? Or were those scenes filmed in totally different places? So the actual distance between the Walton House and Godsey's store was really short. So sometimes where you'd kind of see a shot where we'd be coming directly, or a car would be coming into the front of the house over on the sort of barn side. If you kind of disappeared around that corner, you were right at Godsey's store. So that's how close it was for real. If you showed us walking along towards Godsey's store, it tended to be in the jungle area, which when you got to Godsey's store, there were two sort of paths that left Godsey's store past Godsey's store. So you're walking from the Walton House, you come around the corner, you get to Godsey's store, and then from there were two paths that went into the jungle. And so typically they just shoot something walking along the dirt path in that jungle area. And you continue along in that jungle area, and you get to Drusilla's Pond, which is not all that far along from there either. So fairly close proximity there. And if you continued through the jungle, when you got sort of to the end of the jungle, past Drusilla's Pond, then you got to where the sort of Western Street was and where Rockfish was, where the bus depot was, and right at the beginning of that, the first thing you came across was what we used as the church in later seasons that you saw frequently. And then you got to a little further along, then yes, you got to where the sheriff's station was. You got next to the bus depot and various different things like that. So all pretty close proximity out there on that back lot area. This was a question from Kathy Hewig, this was in a conversation I had with David Doremus, and Kathy was asking, what were those initials you and David were talking about, direct and cutting scenes? I believe we were talking about, David Doremus mentioned that he was looking back at the episodes that he was in and refreshing himself on them before he came to talk to me. And I really appreciated him doing that kind of homework. And in IMDb is the Internet Movie Database. So it lists everything that's been done on TV, usually just union stuff, because I think the information is supplied mostly by the union, but there could be stuff that's not union that's in there too. But so every episode of the Waltons basically is listed there, and it includes a short synopsis of what the episode was, who the cast was, things like that, who the crew was. And if you have the professional version of it, which you pay a fee for, then you can get other details about the filming of it. And sometimes I can look there to see where something was filmed, or maybe if someone asks about what that song was, that piece of music, and sometimes it's in the details and sometimes it's not. I can also find out a little more background on different actors. So I use that frequently for questions that are asked and to find out more about some of the guest cast that, as I've been talking more about the actors who were in episodes, I will look at their resumes there, and maybe a little bit of, sometimes there's a biography there, and sometimes I can get other things. There's trivia. So I'll scan through different things, and ideally the information I'm getting is accurate. But anyway, in looking at IMDb, the episode The Bicycle, it said that G.W. Haynes was in it. And both David and I, sort of looked through that episode and could not find G.W. anywhere in that episode. So then we were talking about, either it was an error and somehow it just got listed in IMDb that he was in that episode, because he was listed in the credits in IMDb as being in that episode. And yet he didn't seem to be. So the only other thing that we were thinking was that maybe there was a scene that he had been in that was cut from the final edit. So when the final edit was done, we didn't see him, or part of a scene was cut. So maybe the beginning of something where he was there, or the end of something when he came in. So things like that can sometimes happen where you were in something and then you got cut out. I have wondered about that with a couple of episodes that I've watched, and I'm like, I know I was in that episode, but I can't see a scene anywhere that I was in. So same sort of question, because I know there was only one episode I wasn't in. So same sort of question. Well, was I in some scene that a piece of it got cut out? So I think that was the question you were asking. I hope it is. I did look back, but that was the only thing I could figure was the IMDb thing and the idea of things being cut. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Ask Judy. If you have a question you'd like to ask me, put it in the comments for any of the episodes. That's where I pull them from. Thanks for watching.